Yeah, so our next speaker is Alessandra Marcon, who works with the Health Law Institute in the Faculty of Law at University of Alberta. And Alessandra will be talking about health misinformation in the age of social media.
Hi, everybody. It's it's a real pleasure to be here on the call, albeit from my home. I really wanted to join this morning. I had a bit of a crazy house dynamic going on with my 2-year-old running around, so I wasn't able to join. So I did notice that there's been some talk already of influencers, so I don't want to repeat too much. So I'll kind of go through the slides quickly, and then if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot them over. So yeah, we're in the Faculty of Law. We're the Health Law Institute. The director of our institute is Professor Timothy Caulfield, and we work a lot on health law, policy, and public perception issues around all kinds of different topics. And I'm just going to give an overview of kind of how information is moving through digital networks with a specific focus on misinformation and fake news. So we know that social media use is growing all around the world in basically every different country. There was some talk earlier on that maybe it would be dipping down or decreasing. It's actually not the case. It's going up pretty much everywhere. We know that more people are getting their news from social media than from newspapers. It's kind of usurping it. This doesn't mean that people aren't reading major news sources, but they're accessing them first through social media. So they'll use, New York Times on Twitter or things like that to get their news. TV is still the most popular though. Here's the stats that we have for Canada. So Facebook's the most important, the most used, YouTube, LinkedIn. I just like to point out that Reddit, which seemingly is very low, still has 9% of Canadians that are going on a site like Reddit to access different kinds of information. And of course, this creates exigencies for the people that are offline versus the people that are online, because they're accessing certain communities, certain kinds of discourses that the people that are offline are not accessing. Health online, we know that more and more people are going online to get health information. They're self-diagnosing, they're looking up second opinions after visiting doctors, they're researching doctors, they're looking for alternative treatments. They're visiting online health communities that they can be very active in. Health services are also participating online. They're getting Facebook pages and Twitter pages. And people young, this is especially in the US, but we think it's similar in Canada, they're more open to sharing health information online. So the idea of what's private and what's not is changing for young people. They're much more open to share health information. And of course, people are using all kinds of apps and wearable technology, which is contributing to the aggregation of data. And there's also an increase in kind of direct-to-consumer genetic testing, which of course is building more databases and more data about individuals. We know that there's all kinds of groups out there, like Patients Like Me and groups like Mumsnet. Bodybuilding is a huge forum where people discuss nutrition and fasting, as well as all kinds of other topics. People on these communities talk about that they learn new information, that they build communities, they connect with others. An example is on Patients Like Me, 30% of epilepsy patients didn't know someone with epilepsy prior to the site. So this could be their first contact with someone who has epilepsy as well. And it's all done digitally, all virtual. Individuals talk about building trust and how certain authority figures, certain people can become authority figures, inside of these communities. The reported benefits that they overcome social stigma. If they have some issues, for example, depression or with obesity, they can find other people to talk to, and that, helps them with the issues that they have. So the specific quirks that I'm just going to talk about here are the ideas of authenticity, so some fake news and mis and disinformation, the idea of bots, and then some of the group dynamics informations that we have. Fake news, I think everyone remembers, fake news has always been a problem, but it was really kickstarted. The recent iteration of this phenomena was with Pizzagate. Not sure if everyone knows about Pizzagate, but it was the idea that Hillary Clinton was basically running a satanic cult out of a pizza joint in Cleveland, Ohio, I think, and they were harvesting the blood of children and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it was huge. It had a huge presence on social media, and it was a way to weaponize social media to portray Hillary Clinton in a certain way. It affected our elections. We had everybody talking about fake news and who was spreading fake news on both sides of the political spectrum. Of course, you can't talk about fake news without mentioning big Donald Trump down in the United States, who's constantly talking about fake news. And if anyone's kind of interested in these topics but doesn't want to read a ton, this is a great book by Angela Nagle called Kill All Normies, and it really dives into some kind of dark pockets of the internet, but gives you a sense of kind of how the social networks have formed and a little bit of the history of the internet, which I find it can be, it's a fast read, it's like 130 pages, and it sheds a lot of light on these kinds of topics. Misinformation, we know that there's a lot of misinformation out there, specifically on Facebook. This was a study that was done by Health Feedback. They looked at the entire year of 2018 at the most shared stories, and they ran them through like a science credibility check, and they just basically found that there was a lot of science lacking in the stories that were making news. They looked specifically at the top 10 and just found that only 3 received a high credibility rating by science. There's just kind of a lot of junk out there. And the top topics of interest were disease, food, and vaccines. So vaccines might be unsurprising, but food is very much in there. Food and nutrition is some of the top stories that are being shared. Fake news is so powerful just because studies have shown, this was published in Science in the middle of 2018, just that it has the ability to diffuse significantly further, faster, and deeper and more broadly than the truth. And part of the reason that this happens is because fake news can be so sensational. It taps into the very emotive roots that we have and grabs our attention. It plays into all kinds of different biases that we have. And so it's very susceptible to be shared. Bots also play a huge role in this space. I think that maybe everyone knows about bots. If I was in a room, I'd ask if people have heard of bots, but I can't really do that here. But these are automated accounts that can do things like share, and create content, and they're having an increasingly large role in the spaces that we inhabit online. Really big on Twitter. They're also really big on Instagram, although I don't have specific data on that. They can be fun and interesting. They're not always malicious. This is a bot that exists on Twitter that takes a picture from a satellite every 4 hours and you can see it. It's pretty neat. So every 4 hours, you get a nice little picture of Earth. Here's a bot that makes comparisons between strange things. It tells you that 142 bottles of wine fit in Donald Trump, or that there's 1,074 human tongues fit inside a blue whale testicle. Kinds of odd things. Here's a bot account which captures every time an MP in the UK tweets and then deletes that tweet. So the bot can capture this. So they exist all over and they're kind of shaping these online spaces that we have. Some research has been done on bots. This is one example of looking at cannabis surveillance on Twitter. And what they found is that the bots, I can just read this example here, posts indicating that cannabis could allay health concerns represented a larger proportion of posts by social bots compared to non-bots. So unsubstantiated health claims perpetuated by social bots may have offline consequences, such as leaving Twitter users with the impression that cannabis can allay health problems such as cancer. So when they looked at all the different messaging on Twitter that was existing around CBD, the bots were kind of sharing one kinds of stories that actual users were not, for propagating these particular ideas. Lots of people are looking at bots in all kinds of contexts. This is Elizabeth Dubois from the University of Ottawa and Fenwick McEvely from Concordia. They're looking at in the political sphere, but they are interesting accounts to follow. They're doing a lot in this space. Bots are obviously a heavy topic right now with COVID being present, and a lot of people are starting to assess what kind of information bots are spreading. This is just one small example, but there's lots of studies that are coming out. Is it really a problem? Many Americans believe that fake news is sowing confusion. People all around the world are worried about fake news, which is causing them to doubt some of the information that they read, or they're questioning what's true and what's not. Recently, the COVID pandemic has been called an infodemic by the leader of the WHO. Definitely an issue, it's a problem. And it's also an issue because of the power of exposure. This is research that's come out from Gordon Pennycook, we'll talk about near the end of the presentation. But what he also talks about is this idea of the illusory truth, and this idea that previous exposure increases perceived accuracy of fake news. So even if you know that something's not true and you think it's fake, when you're continually bombarded with this messaging, it starts to create the idea of accuracy. So it becomes more permanence. It creates a higher level of permanence, excuse me. And it just becomes tougher and tougher to combat once these ideas are kind of placed and they start to perpetuate. Of course, media attention right now is, there's more people using it, more people consuming media, but the space is becoming tighter and tighter. So everyone's trying to contribute to the space in different ways. And this is kind of a burgeoning area of research. There's not a ton done, but we're starting to kind of look at if the way that journalism is being affected by the need for attention, the need to create sensational headlines, the need to kind of drive contents to their websites, and whether or not that's affecting the way that they report on certain things. This is kind of summarized by this small piece written by John Oedinis from Stanford. And he looked at the top 100 articles that had altmetric scores so this is the altmetric score, I think everyone knows, based on social media attention. And what he summarizes is that effective dissemination of public health messages may need to focus on a few powerful, easy, contentious pieces of advice. For example, uncontested major recommendations including the following: do not smoke, exercise regularly, don't eat too much, don't be obese, limit alcohol, sleep well. Conversely, the current informational cloud quickly becomes overpolluted with confusing minutiae. With limited mention of the major causes of death, the average person is bombarded with conflicting messages: which nutrients, the benefits of dog ownership, is your smartphone causing you stress? There's that story about having smartphone neck. Maybe your spine was going to be affected by too much use on your smartphone, things like this. And given the rampant global health risk and numeracy, communicating secondary issues may be largely a fruitless detracting nuisance. So this is just kind of the noise that exists and how people are trying to shift through and find the truth amidst all this noise. We've done some work at our institute specifically on fake news in the context of stem cell research. We used a great database that was constructed by Professor Melissa Zimdars in the United States. And we found a lot of junk sci websites, and we looked at how stem cell research was portrayed on them. And what we saw was hugely extreme representations of the science. So both hyperbolic cures and fears existing at the same time. So this is, yeast is a cause of cancer, and turmeric can kill both. Research confirms you can grow new teeth with stem cell dental implants. So kind of these two extremities of what's going on in the stem cell space. What we also noticed is that the networks that exist around this kind of discourse are very interlocked. So they would share a lot of the same pieces with almost none of the content shared. So although you're at one website like Natural News, which is quite large and predominant, it's actually sharing content with websites like Health Nut News or with Mercola, Joseph Mercola's website. It's run by, Natural News anyways, run by Mike the Health Ranger Adams. So he's kind of propagating a lot of this influential figure. And just an example from their site, they have a story like this: teenage boy dies from meningitis only months after receiving the vaccine. There's a lot of anti-vaccine sentiment on these web pages. The Washington Post ran an expose on the anti-vax movement, and what it found is that contrary to what they believed, which was that it was huge numbers of people contributing to the funds of the National Vaccine Information Center, which is kind of a huge anti-vax tank, they found about 40% of the donations came from Joseph Mercola, who has amassed a huge fortune selling natural health products, including supplements and things like that. So these networks are quite thick, and they're identifiable. Influencers, as I say, I missed the talk in the morning, so perhaps this has been talked about a lot, but huge influencers that we have Barack Obama, Gwyneth Paltrow, of course. I couldn't talk about give this presentation without mentioning a little bit of Gwyneth, just to respect to my boss, Tim. Cristiano Ronaldo, huge figure on Facebook. I'm not sure if people know this guy, PewDiePie. He has over 100 million subscribers now on YouTube. He's a huge figure for kids, just people who spend a lot of time on YouTube. Big presence. Kim Kardashian and the World Health Organization. This is something that Tim likes to share. Over 100 million followers for Kim Kardashian, and then we get the World Health Organization here at 4.3 million. So it's in there. It's putting up a fight, but it's substantially, obviously, smaller presence online. When we think about the kind of dynamics that are created, we really get these kind of in-group and out-group that can be created by these different groups. This is, old ideas that date back to scholars like Antonio Gramsci, who talked about the idea of public intellectuals. Now we kind of use the word influencer to talk about them, but how similar groups of people talk about things and frame subjects in certain ways and for different reasons. So for example, if we see somebody who's sharing the supplements that they take on a daily basis, it just seems like one image, but when you find out that this image comes from Katy Perry with 75 million followers, it sends a certain kind of messaging around the idea of supplements. Influencers are important, as we know. This is a trust barometer, which was created by the 2017 Edelman Trust Barometer. It finds a person like you is almost as trustworthy as an academic expert. So again, someone who's part of your community, who's similar to you, they find them to be very credible. There's a lot of herd influence that can work their way through these accounts. And this is partly because as an experiment that was run on science, once content gets a like, what they found in this study is that there's 32% more likely for this content to get another like. And we know that when things start to get liked and shared, they move up the algorithms on social media platforms and they gain more prevalence. So it's quite easy for a celebrity to post something, which of course gets likes, and it gains more and more prominence. And this just happens by the herd effect of liking, which goes on online. Another element to this is this idea of discourse coalitions, which ties into the same thing. This is when you get a lot of people with a similar objective talking about something in a similar way. And there's really easy examples that we can see of this now. People who are pro the science of vaccines might use the hashtag vaccines work, or actually make logical arguments or discuss things with certain rhetoric to support that idea. And you get other people who are anti-vaccine, in this case, this example, who use the hashtag big pharma. And so regardless of what someone else is saying, they say, you're in the pocket of big pharma, this is why you support vaccines. So they use similar rhetorical tools on both sides. So these health buzzwords get created, and they're really popular, I think, as everyone knows. They're really effective at generating trends and becoming marketing tools for brand development and for market sales. We're on a grant right now with collaborating with UBC, looking at microbiome research. So microbiome research, the catchphrase that comes out of this site is the idea of gut health and having a healthy gut, which of course leads into the huge market of prebiotics, probiotics, and supplements. So examples of all these kinds of rhetorical devices that are used is the idea of toxins, and clean eating, detoxing, boosting your immunity, immune boosters, and this, idea of alternative. All these kinds of rhetorical devices can be used kind of in this context anyway to promote the idea of gut health. So we've just started looking at some of the research around this, and we've looked at Instagram, and there's all kinds of different accounts that are promoting this. These are gut health recipes you can find for an account. This is the Gut Health MD, promoting the ideas around gut health. There's a gut health cookbook that exists. So there's lots of different examples of people taking this very preliminary science and immediately commercializing off of the preliminary science to promote different ideas that they have, or just to grow their account, which they can be profitable from. It's kind of, I wasn't exactly sure of the audience. I'm sure we've already talked about influencers, but we have this idea of a fire in the middle, a very lucrative fire with lots of attention. We get a celebrity who started a health brand. In this case, we have Jessica Alba and the Honest Co. She's got a log to throw on the fire. All of the brands that exist, well, of course, they've got logs to throw on this fire. Then you have the social media that loves attention. And so they have a log to throw on this fire. And so everyone is working together, supporting each other. Everyone is growing online and social media. But out in the cold, we can think of Edmonton here. I'm based in Edmonton. We just went through a horrific winter. So we can picture a nice cold Edmonton winter far away from the fire. And we kind of have science, accuracy, evidence, truth. The inability to brand is kind of cast outside of this loop. And it's really tough to kind of break through these cycles and work our way into there. So on these sites, we see explicit brands, just advertising. This is just an example that I took just a couple days ago. Direct advertising that we see on a site like Instagram. We also see companies. This is with Paltrow's company on Goop. And then we also see the influencer who exists with millions of followers. They have paid partnerships with companies. They advertise directly for the company inside of their post. At the same time, they build their own brand. So they're working their own brand plus the company that supports them. Huge numbers of likes. I don't know who this account is, so I'm not sure how many followers they have, but it could very well be in the millions. And so research has gone into this kind of idea of the self-branding micro-celebrity, this rise of social media influencers, as I think everyone knows. There's lots of figures that exist, people like Ben Greenfield, who's kind of a biohacker. I'm not sure if people have heard of him, but he promotes a lot of ideas around things that you can do to your body, which includes sometimes the taking of supplements or very questionable science. He has some anti-vaccine rhetoric. I'm not sure if people here know, but maybe everyone knows the Food Babe. The Food Babe has millions of subscribers to her Facebook page, and she is a big proponent of the idea of toxins. So chemicals are bad, and all kinds of toxins are bad in your food. And this figure here, which people might not know, she's Australian. Her name is Belle Gibson, and Belle Gibson claimed to have brain cancer that she cured with a natural diet. And she actually built $1 million nutrition industry around her ideas and this very, very strong narrative of curing brain cancer. That's one of these key components of lots of these sites, is the idea to deploy catchy, powerful stories that include these buzzwords to create this emotional kind of resonance with people. We've done kind of an overview study on this. This is a study that we published in the Canadian Journal of Bioethics that came out of a workshop that we hosted, and just kind of outlining some of these issues around health narratives that we're continually trying to explore at our institute. So of course, there's countering to this kind of narrative messaging. This is from Vox, Why the Food Babe Enrages Scientists. We get people on NBR, scientists speaking out. Is the fear babe a fearmonger, right? Some people are even more direct, like we see here on the website Gawker, just going straight at it. And then we had journalists who dug into the Belle Gibson story, and we actually found out that she'd never had brain cancer and never had cancer of any kind. So this is the classic case, not of misinformation, but of blatant fake news, disinformation, to build a website. And I think the point that kind of comes out of this is the efforts that people need to go into to kind of debunk this, and to call out some of these initiatives and to be active on some of these sites and to question the kinds of messaging that exists and to not let that messaging just persist in some of these spaces. This is just a small example that I actually included in this presentation from last night. Tim tweeted this out. This is, I think she's a scientist at University of Victoria, and so this is her Twitter post, and she says, it's just another influencer selling immune boosters trying to profit off the global pandemic. I think this is from 3 or 4 days ago. And you can see here, this is the classic case of someone, I think this account has like 1 million followers. So again, this classic kind of social media influencer. Product display right in the front, including the product inside of the comments, and this idea of you can boost your immunity during the global pandemic, which of course she profits from through the account. A great researcher who's doing a lot of work in this space is Gordon Pennycook from the University of Regina. We're very fortunate to be on a grant with Gordon right now, as well as Cheryl Peters from the University of Calgary, looking at these ideas of misinformation, and Gordon's done all kinds of great work. So what I'm going to list here is basically work that's come out of his research about what we know about misinformation and how it works and what's continuing to unfold in this space. And it's complicated, so it's really messy. A lot of people are doing work here, and it's really hard to come up with concrete conclusions, but here's some that we have. Political ideology is not a significant indicator of those who spread fake news. So I think some people seem to think it's only on one side of the political spectrum. It doesn't seem to really be the case. It seems to kind of exist everywhere. Social media is built around driving attention, as I've already mentioned, and it's usually terrible for critical thought. And so forcing people to pause and think before sharing actually can help people from stopping the spread of fake news. So I don't know if this would be kind of a buffer that the platforms could put in front of news that they've deemed that's questionable. And I think maybe some people have seen this happening during COVID on Facebook. I've seen it in my feed where somebody posts something and then on top it says, this news is questionable. Are you sure you want to proceed? Kind of engaging it, or there's some kind of caution that exists on top of it. Or even just asking people, are you sure you want to share this website? We've flagged it as potentially questionable news. Might have some effect on whether or not people share it. A big indicator for those who fall for fake news, again, it's not really necessarily political ideology, but it's just people with limited scientific understanding and knowledge. So they don't have a clear sense, basically, of basic science or more advanced science, and these people are more likely to fall for fake news. And lastly, the debunking efforts, there's been some discussion about whether or not they actually help or not. And basically it's complicated, but it seems that they do help. They do have a positive impact and don't necessarily backfire. But continual research is needed into exploring the best ways that you can debunk things that exist online. And so you want to not necessarily have it be purely combative, but kind of building trust at the same time. I think Dr. Jen Gunter, who people might know online, is a really good example of debunking a lot of myths out there. So what does this mean for people concerned with science, accuracy, and helping the public? We really need engagement from scientists offline and on. So we need some people to be contributing some positive discourse to these spaces. We need to be educating the public beyond just trusting our school systems around basic concepts, around the ideas of causation versus correlation. I couldn't include it in this study, but there's a great Twitter account called Justin Mice. And Justin Mice retweets every time a study comes out that's proving some outlandish claim that's only taken place in mice so far. So this is a good example of creative initiatives that exist. So you need to educate, and it needs to be engaging, but it needs to be engaging without sacrificing accuracy. So you don't want to create just inaccurate clickbait, especially in the debunking efforts. Of course, we want to increase trust in medicine and healthcare. So this involves, research distancing itself from industry continually. We need continual research on social media. The development of AI tools, as has already been raised, is a continual thing that needs to happen. I was at a conference in Kelowna last year, and Gretchen Reynolds, who's a lifestyle reporter for the New York Times, made a great point that people, when they have the opportunities to talk to the popular press, really need to make sure that the coverage that's given to their research is done properly. And so this includes some of the caveats that, like, it's very preliminary research, or helping them understand these ideas of causation correlation, or it's a very small study, or it's an anecdotal study, and really making sure that the researcher knows that. And what she was trying to convey there is that sometimes people who work in health research for major publications don't actually have a health background or even a science background. So they might not know how to actually talk about the study. They're just trying to meet their deadlines. So I just thought I'd pass that on, advice from her. And of course, generally we need to just pressure social media companies to be better. This happened just yesterday. Facebook removed a bunch of pages that were deemed questionable for inauthentic behavior. And I think that this has come about because a lot of people are putting pressure on these platforms to start taking more action against some of this news. And so it's not just going to happen on its own. It's going to need people being active, putting pressure on some of these companies. Earlier on, I mentioned Mike, the Health Ranger. His site has actually been blocked now from YouTube. He received a ton of pressure from academics, I believe, in the United States. And yeah, his site got taken down. This is a great piece that was just published yesterday about going viral, how to boost the spread of coronavirus science on social media. Lots of really great tips here about how you can engage with social media. I was just reading this in a park yesterday. Really, really helpful stuff if you want to check it out. If you don't have a Twitter account and you want to start thinking about how you can be on Twitter, I'd suggest maybe giving this a read. Lastly, this is a squid biologist in the United States. Her name's Sarah McNulty. She has a great initiative called Skype a Scientist. And so what she's done is she connects scientists with elementary school classrooms all over the United States, and they just broadcast in, and all these different scientists teach the classes about the scientific work that they're doing. It's low cost, it's accessible, it's very easy to have different groups become engaged with it. It's growing a lot. Right now it says, I think she has, the site's growing a lot anyway, so she's getting more and more people involved. So it's a really nice way to share information with people and to get people thinking about science in creative ways. And lastly, from an OBGYN conference that I presented at, this idea comes from that. Don't just tell people that there's too much garbage online. You need to tell them where to go to find information. And if you can't find those websites, you need to create them. And this came from an OBGYN in Calgary who created her own website with FAQs to kind of cut through some of the fake news and the junk news that's out there. So she suggested that all patients that would come to her, she had a website that she built herself that she could recommend them to. And she said it was extremely efficient and it was really helpful way to transmit information. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for having me.